I knew something was wrong. It was early morning, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat, and Derek walked into the kitchen with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He held out the glass and said he made it just for me. I did not drink it. Something in my chest tightened. Instead, I placed the glass back into his hand and said the words that changed everything. "I do not know, baby, your mother drank it." For a second he froze. His smile flickered. Then he rushed down the hallway so fast he nearly slipped. I followed a few steps behind and saw exactly what I expected. His mother Lorraine was on the floor beside her bed, struggling to breathe, her skin pale and her body trembling. Derek knelt beside her and kept saying her name. His voice cracked, but his eyes were full of something I could not name at that moment. Fear, yes, but not the kind a son feels when he is worried about his mother. It was a different kind of fear. The fear of a man whose plan had just gone terribly wrong. Before I continue, let me take you back to the beginning, to the first moment I realized the man I loved was no longer the man living in my home. That moment did not start with poison. It started with silence. A silence so heavy it pressed on every corner of the house and settled right between us without either of us noticing. The silence in our house did not arrive all at once. It slipped in quietly, like a draft under a closed door, and settled into the spaces where our conversations used to be. At first, I told myself that Derek was tired. Work had been demanding and people changed when life pulled them in different directions. But over time, the small things added up until the truth was impossible to ignore. Every morning used to start the same way. I would be in the kitchen, scrambling eggs or slicing fruit, and Derek would come up behind me and wrap his arms around my waist. He always smelled like cedar from his aftershave, and he used to kiss the top of my head before saying good morning. Those moments were soft and simple. Then one day they stopped. No warning, no explanation. Derek began walking past me without saying a word. He would sit at the table with his phone in his hand, scrolling through messages he never allowed me to see. When I asked if everything was all right, he would nod without looking up, as if talking to me required too much effort. There were other changes too. He became irritable over the smallest things. If the toast was slightly burnt, he pushed the plate away. If his shirt was not folded the way he preferred, he tossed it onto the bed. He came home later and later, always blaming work, but I could tell he was lying. His excuses were too rehearsed, too practiced. What alarmed me most was the distance in his eyes. Derek had always been intense, but now there was something cold about him, something calculating. Whenever I tried to bridge the growing gap between us, he responded with half smiles and vague answers that felt like walls. I wanted to believe we were just going through a difficult phase. I held on to that hope longer than I should have. But every morning, as he sat at the table tapping on his phone and ignoring the world around him, the feeling grew heavier. The man drinking coffee across from me was not the same man I had married. And deep down, I knew something much darker was unfolding. The first sign that something was truly wrong did not come from Derek. It came from his mother Lorraine. She had always been a strong woman, the kind who kept her garden alive through every season and never missed her afternoon walks. But over the span of a few weeks, she began to look exhausted in a way that did not make sense. At first she brushed it off. She said she was just tired or had not slept well. But I saw more than fatigue. Her hands trembled when she tried to grip a cup. Her breath came short after climbing a single flight of stairs. Her skin looked more pale each day, and she often complained of dizziness. Derek, strangely, became more involved in her daily routine. It was sudden, almost unnatural. He took over her medication schedule, insisting that only he should manage it. He prepared her meals even when I offered to help. And then there were the drinks. Smoothies, he called them. Healthy blends to boost her strength. He made them every morning and carried them to her room with a smile that felt too rehearsed. The drinks were thick, greenish, with a faint bitter scent I could never quite identify. When I asked what he put in them, he replied with a vague list of fruits and supplements, never looking directly at me. One afternoon, I found an unfinished glass on her bedside table. The top layer had separated into a darker shade, almost grayish, and the smell made my stomach twist. I dipped my finger lightly on the rim and tasted a tiny drop. It was sharp and bitter, nothing like any smoothie I had ever tasted. When I asked Lorraine how she felt after drinking them, she gave me a tired smile. Derek says they will help me regain my energy. He wants me to get better quickly. He is always so thoughtful. Thoughtful. The word echoed in my mind in a way that made my chest tighten. Derek had never cared this much before. Not like this, not with this intensity. It felt less like care and more like control, and as Lorraine grew weaker, a cold thought settled into my mind. Something about these drinks, about Derek's sudden devotion, did not feel right. I just did not yet know how right my instincts were. The night everything changed started like any other. Lorraine had spent most of the afternoon resting in her room. Derek brought her another one of his smoothies, and she forced a small smile as she drank it. I stood in the doorway, watching closely, feeling that same uneasy pull in my stomach. A few hours later, I heard a loud thud from her bedroom. When I rushed inside, Lorraine was collapsed on the floor, her hands weakly reaching toward the edge of the bed. Her breaths were shallow, her eyes unfocused. For a moment, time stopped. Derek appeared behind me, and his face went white. He scooped her into his arms and shouted that we had to get her to the hospital immediately. We rushed to the car. He drove faster than I had ever seen him drive, hands shaking on the wheel. But what struck me most was not his speed. It was the look in his eyes. It was fear, yes, but not the kind of fear that comes from losing a parent. There was something deeper, something almost frantic, like a plan slipping through his fingers. At the hospital, Dr. Mason Hale examined Lorraine carefully. After a series of tests, he pulled Derek and me aside. His voice was calm but firm. Her symptoms resembled the early stages of toxic exposure. Not lethal, but serious enough to cause a collapse. Derek immediately denied everything. He insisted she must have eaten something spoiled. His words poured out too fast, too desperate. Dr. Hale asked what she had consumed that day, and Derek hesitated. It was only half a second, but I noticed it. That tiny pause meant everything. While Derek left to make a phone call, I stepped outside to clear my head. Something pushed me toward the car. A voice inside me whispered that I had to look. I opened the glove compartment and found a small clear bottle tucked beside the documents. It was filled with a liquid that looked like water, but the moment I uncapped it, a sharp chemical smell hit my nose. It was not water, not even close. My hands trembled as I slipped the bottle into my bag. I knew I had just found something important, something that tied everything together. That night, as I watched Derek pacing the hospital hallway, a truth settled inside me with chilling clarity. Lorraine collapsing was not an accident, and Derek was not afraid of losing her. He was afraid of the truth coming out. When we finally returned home from the hospital, the house felt different. It was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that settles after something breaks. Derek went straight to the bedroom, saying he needed rest. I watched him disappear down the hallway, and for the first time I felt no urge to follow. Instead, I walked into the study. Something inside me told me that the answers I needed were somewhere in that room. Derek always handled our paperwork and insisted on keeping everything organized. He said it made life easier. Now I wondered if it had been for an entirely different reason. I opened the file cabinet and started going through the folders. Most of them were harmless. Utility bills, tax documents, bank statements. Then I saw a plain brown folder with my name written neatly on the tab. My pulse quickened. Inside was a life insurance policy, a large one, the kind of policy meant for someone much older or much sicker. But the part that made my breath catch was the beneficiary. It listed only one name: Derek Whitfield. My hands tightened around the document as I scanned the details. The policy had been created 3 months ago, right around the time Derek began acting distant, the time he started coming home late, the time he became obsessed with controlling everything in the house. Then I saw something that made my stomach twist. My signature was at the bottom of the form, but it was not my handwriting. The letters were shaped differently, too smooth, too curved. I had never signed this. I sat back in the chair, the truth washing over me in a slow, cold wave. Derek had taken out a massive insurance policy on my life. He had forged my signature. He had positioned himself as the only person who would benefit if something happened to me. And Lorraine getting sick suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. If he had been practicing, testing, adjusting doses, then she had been his unintended target, a mistake he had not planned for. I closed the folder and held it against my chest. The room felt heavier. The air felt thinner. Whatever was happening in my home was no longer a suspicion. It was a plan, a deliberate one, and I was at the center of it. That evening the house felt heavier than it ever had. Derek moved around quietly, almost too quietly, as if he was afraid any sound might reveal something he was trying to keep hidden. I kept my distance, pretending to fold laundry in the hallway while keeping one ear tuned to his footsteps. When he finally stepped into the guest room to make a phone call, He closed the door but did not latch it completely. A thin sliver of light shone through the gap, and his voice traveled just enough for me to hear. I held my breath and moved closer, each step careful and slow. At first his tone was low, almost irritated. Then it shifted. He said, "She does not suspect anything. She has been calm all day. It should not take much longer." My heart thudded in my chest. I pressed my back against the wall, the words sinking into my skin like cold water. There was a pause, and then he continued, "Yesterday was not supposed to happen. She drank it before I could stop her. Yes, I know it was risky, but I had to try something." My hands began to shake. I stared at the wall in front of me, every muscle in my body tightening as the truth became clearer. He spoke again, this time slower, more deliberate. "Once everything goes through and I get the money, we can move forward. I just need the right moment. That is all." The right moment. He was talking about me, not Lorraine, me. It felt as if the entire hallway tilted beneath my feet. I reached for the doorknob of the linen closet beside me, steadying myself as my breath turned shallow. I forced myself not to make a sound, not yet, not until I knew exactly how far this plan of his went. A soft laugh escaped him, the kind that carried confidence, even excitement. "I will handle it. Do not worry, she trusts me." He ended the call with a calmness that made my skin crawl. When he stepped out of the room, I had already moved back toward the living room, pretending to sort blankets. He walked past me without a word, humming a tune under his breath as if he had not just planned the end of our marriage, and possibly my life. That was the moment I realized the truth in its full, chilling form. I was living under the same roof with a man who was waiting for the perfect opportunity to make sure I never saw another sunrise. The next morning I went to the hospital early, long before Derek woke up. The hallways were quiet, and the soft beeping of machines echoed down the corridor as I approached Lorraine's room. She was sitting up when I walked in, her face still pale but her eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. She smiled weakly when she saw me. "Aubrey, you are here early. Is everything all right?" For a moment I hesitated. I did not know how much to tell her. But then I remembered the way she collapsed, the way Derek had panicked for the wrong reasons, and the bottle I had found in the car. She deserved the truth. Maybe she even needed it. I sat beside her and lowered my voice. "Lorraine, has anything felt strange recently? Anything at all after drinking the smoothies Derek made for you?" Her expression shifted. At first she looked confused, then thoughtful and finally troubled. She stared at her hands for a long moment before speaking. "I thought it was just age catching up to me," she said softly. "But something felt off. After those drinks I always felt dizzy, or sick, but I did not want to worry him." I took a breath and decided to speak gently. "Lorraine, I need to tell you something. I think Derek may be involved in what is happening, not by accident, on purpose." Her head lifted sharply. She searched my face, and in that moment I saw the moment everything connected for her. The sudden attention, the controlling behavior, the drinks she never asked for, the way Derek hovered over her. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "I knew he was ambitious. But this? Aubrey, what has he done?" I told her everything. The insurance file, the forged signature, the overheard phone call, the bottle in the car. She listened without interrupting, her eyes filling with disbelief and regret. When I finished, she reached for my hand and held it tightly. "You are not facing this alone," she said. "Whatever he is planning, we will stop it, together." In that quiet hospital room, something shifted. For the first time since everything began, I did not feel alone. Two women, once connected only by marriage, were now bound by something far stronger: the truth. Leaving the hospital that day, I felt a different kind of strength forming inside me. Fear was still there, of course, but it no longer controlled me. I knew what Derek was capable of now, and I knew I had to stay a few steps ahead if I wanted to make it out safely. When I returned home, the house was empty. Derek had gone to work, which gave me the time I desperately needed. I started by gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I photographed the life insurance policy from every angle and took close shots of the forged signature. I transferred the pictures to a hidden folder in my email and backed them up on a small flash drive I slipped into my purse. Next, I pulled the bottle I had taken from the car out of my bag. I placed it into a sealed container. It might not have looked like much, but I knew it mattered. It was another piece of the puzzle. Then came the hardest part. I needed a recording of Derek admitting enough to reveal his intentions. That night I left my phone on the dresser, face down, recording before he walked into the bedroom. I asked him if he was still stressed about everything with his mother. His response was quick and irritated. He said, "Yesterday was messy enough. I do not need more problems. She should not have drunk it." Those words were enough, not a full confession, but something that pointed in the right direction. I labeled the audio file and stored it safely. With each step, the plan became clearer in my mind. I needed time. I needed Lorraine strong enough to speak for herself. And most of all, I needed to act as if nothing had changed. If Derek sensed anything, even a shift in my tone, everything could fall apart. So I played my role. I cooked dinner. I folded laundry. I answered his small talk with calm nods. But every movement had purpose. Every breath was part of a countdown he did not know had already started. The day I confronted Derek arrived sooner than I expected. Lorraine had been discharged from the hospital and was resting at home, still weak but mentally sharper than I had seen her in months. She asked if I was ready. I told her I was. I had been ready since the moment I found the insurance file. That afternoon I asked Derek to come into her room. He looked annoyed, but he followed. Lorraine sat upright, her hands folded in her lap, watching him with an expression that held more disappointment than anger. "What is going on?" he asked. I stepped forward and placed the folder on the table. I began calmly, starting with the simplest truth. "I found this in the study." He opened the folder, and for a moment his face did not move. Then he laughed lightly, as if the situation was nothing more than a misunderstanding. "It is just paperwork, Aubrey." I reached into my bag and set the sealed bottle beside the folder. Then I tapped my phone, playing the recording of him saying, "She should not have drunk it." His expression changed instantly. The confidence drained from his face. Lorraine spoke next. Her voice was steady. "Derek, look at me. You almost killed me. Do you understand that?" He stared at her, struggling to find words. He muttered excuses about stress and pressure, but the truth was already laid bare in the room. There was no way to disguise it. I stepped back, letting the silence speak for itself. When he finally lifted his eyes to mine, I said softly, "I am leaving. And everything here will be turned in. You will not have another chance to hurt either of us." I walked out of the room without waiting for a response. For the first time in months, the air around me felt clear. I left the house that same evening with one small suitcase and the evidence secured in my bag. I did not slam the door. I did not raise my voice. I simply walked away from the place where I had almost lost myself. Lorraine watched me from the doorway, her eyes filled with the kind of sorrow only a mother can feel. She whispered, "Thank you for saving me, Aubrey." I nodded gently, because in truth she had saved me too. I stayed at a friend's house for a few days while preparing everything with the authorities. I sent copies of the documents, the lab report, and the recording to my attorney. He told me I had done everything with precision and patience, and that those two qualities had protected my life more than I realized. During those quiet days, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. The fear, the confusion, the betrayal. I let myself cry without holding back. There was no shame in it. There was relief. There was release. A week later, when the officers came for Derek, I did not return to watch. I had already seen enough darkness. My chapter with him ended the moment I stepped out of that house. What happened afterward was simply the consequence of his own decisions. I rented a small apartment near the coast, a place with soft morning light and the sound of waves that reminded me life can start over at any time. Lorraine called often, apologizing for things that were never her fault. I always reassured her. We both needed healing, not blame. One morning while walking along the shore, I realized something simple but powerful. Survival is not just escaping danger. It is choosing peace even when fear tries to follow you. And that choice, I finally understood, was mine to make. Looking back, I sometimes ask myself how everything spiraled so far out of control. How did a marriage built on trust turn into a battlefield I did not even see coming until one day, life forced me to open my eyes? The truth is simple. Evil rarely arrives with loud footsteps. It arrives quietly, gently, through small changes in behavior, small shifts in tone, small requests that seem innocent. By the time the danger becomes obvious, it has already woven itself into your daily life. But here is the part that matters. You still have the power to walk away. You still have the power to protect yourself. And even when your voice shakes, it still counts as courage. Leaving Derek was not an act of revenge. It was an act of self-respect. It was the moment I chose myself over fear, over manipulation of the illusion of a marriage that no longer existed. If you are watching this and something in your life feels wrong, listen to that feeling. Pay attention to the small signs. Believe the quiet warnings inside you. They exist for a reason. And if you ever reach the point where staying becomes more dangerous than leaving, remember my story. Remember that you deserve peace, you deserve safety, you deserve a life where love